job is to protect and advance this business. And sometimes those two things feel like they're not aligned, but our job is to align them. And so you should not be protecting the business just for the hell of it. You're protecting the business because that's a way of advancing the business sometimes, right?
Hello, listeners. It's good to be back. I've been absent for a little bit, but I'm back today with a fantastic interview. I've got Lynn Charytan, who's the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Comcast Cable. She joined me in today's episode. Once again, another marvellous story, fantastic journey. Lynn takes us through her journey from spending some time at the Washington Post as a young lawyer, through to WilmerHale. I think she had 17 years there as a partner, including a lot of that time as a partner, and then moving in about 2010 to Comcast, and then being there for almost 15 years. And takes us through her journey. Some fantastic insights there, including a couple of milestone moments she shares, one of them being an aha moment when she realised what her job really was. And I love that. I've taken some notes around that. In fact, used that myself, I have to say. Lynn talks about what's top of mind for her. No surprises there. Cybersecurity gets a mention, as does the way Comcast Cable and no doubt other companies are thinking about AI, both from a business perspective as well as from an in-house legal perspective, and thinking about how AI can be used, can help improve the function. So she touches on those topics. It's a fantastic discussion. I love all of my, of course, interactions with the GC community, and this is absolutely no exception. So in the usual fashion, sit back, chillax, and enjoy the episode with Lynn Charytan. Lynn, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to sharing your story with the audience.
It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Lynn, warm us up a little bit. You're the General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Comcast. Just tell the audience a little bit about what does that actually cover in terms of the businesses and the brands that sit under the Comcast umbrella?
Sure. So I'm actually the GC for Comcast Cable, which is a company that provides cable and broadband and Wi-Fi and voice services and alarm monitoring and all that good stuff. We are part of the Comcast family. So everything branded Xfinity and Comcast Business Services, that's all ours. In the Comcast corporate family is also NBC and Universal for like the theme parks and the movie studios, as well as Sky over in Europe and a couple of countries over there. So there are, within the entire company, actually 4 general counsels. There's the corporate parent, GC, for just the parent. There's an NBC general counsel, there's Sky general counsel, and then there's me.
And there's Comcast. Fantastic. Now, we caught up a couple of weeks ago and you shared a story, and it kind of reminded me of my little story. And as I mentioned to you before, because I can't resist talking about myself, I'm going to share my story a little bit, and you'll see the way it'll dovetail into yours. But Lynn, I recall as back in 2007 when I had left law firm partnership at a very prestigious firm in Australia. It was called Mallisons then, or King & Wood Mallisons now. And I flew across the world to land in Dubai to start off with a new law firm, new practice. I walked into the room where the office was, and I remember doing that. It was about 110 degrees outside. I just landed on the tarmac. I made my way to the office, and in the office I found empty shelves and a laptop. And the laptop was actually a computer. It wasn't a laptop at the time. And it had 2 emails. One was from IT, welcome. And the second was from my managing partner then, a guy by the name of David Churd, said, Jim, looking forward to your business plan about how you're going to build a disputes and regulatory practice in the Middle East. And I turned around and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? All I have is this empty office and a computer with 2 emails. Now, you have a kind of a similar story, not overseas story, but when you landed in 2010, having left WilmerHale, I think, to join Comcast Cable. And I think you might have had a BlackBerry is what you told me. Can you share that with us?
So when I first came over, I was coming to head up really create a legal regulatory function. There was a government affairs function, and there were some lawyers in the cable law department who did some regulatory stuff, but there was no kind of independent group that really supported GA and would do regulatory appeals and that sort of thing. So I'd been hired to come over and do that. And I walked into the office, the DC office, on the first day, and there was a BlackBerry on the desk, an otherwise empty office, and a computer. That was all. There were no instructions. There was no welcome kit. No one from HR came and helped me figure anything out. And I just was sort of standing there saying, like, okay, this is my job. And what's more is I called the general counsel at the time, was our block. I called at the corporate level. I called him and I said, "So I'm here. Is there anything you want me to start working on or focusing on?" He was like, "No, not really. Um, no one really had a thing for me to do when I first arrived. I mean, within a few weeks, I had filled that plate up quite significantly on my own, but I really just had to start doing things, and it was really funny. So I've worked a lot on making sure we have a good onboarding process for lawyers coming into the group ever since.
Yeah. Well, take me to the kind of the decision point. You were at WilmerHale at the time, successful partner, no doubt, and you would have had a career kind of mapped out as a long-time law firm partner. You chose something different. Just take us through that, the thinking around that, what it was to entice you off an otherwise kind of well-trodden path.
Yeah, I mean, before I went to the law firm, after I clerked, I worked in-house at the Washington Post for a couple of years, and I probably just got the bug at that point. I liked being a part of the client, even as the lawyer. I sort of liked the we part of it and being really close to it and getting to see something sort of from cradle to grave, as we say. Although it's not a very attractive phrase, but really just being able to live a problem all the way through and really be invested in it, which I think actually made me a better law firm partner, to be honest, because I did approach all of my clients like that. It was like I wanted to be a part of it. And I was always a little sad when, you'd work on something really hard and then they would sort of move on without you, because I was like, well, I'm a part of the team.
Yeah.
So I think I always sort of thought, well, maybe I'll go back in-house at some point. When I left the Post, I did look around DC. At the time I was leaving, there really weren't a lot of major companies
Yeah.
with DC offices back then. I mean, there was sort of the military industrial complex and a couple of phone companies, but the jobs were like, you want to review this tariff uh, in this small office for the next 10 years. So I just went back to a law firm and I started doing work in that space, in the telecom space. This is sort of a little bit related to the First Amendment stuff and other stuff I'd done at the Post, but it was always in the back of my head about sometime, leaving. And then, suddenly I look up, I'd been at Wilmer for over 17 years. So I wasn't really activating it, doing anything about it. Um, and I sort of had this thought in my head, like, by the time I hit 45, I need to just make a decision, because I will have been at Wilmer not quite 20 years, but I don't know if they still do, but they had a mandatory retirement at 65. So I sort of felt like, roughly, in bad math, I'm about halfway through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I should decide now, or this is the time to make a decision. And then I probably did nothing about that. But right when I was 44, a couple of these, an option to go into at the time, the Obama administration came up. And then at the same time, this Comcast opportunity sort of really just walked in the door. And I decided, like, this is it. Like, this is the message. Like, take one of these or stop talking about it. So
Yeah.
I did.
Okay, so now take us through the journey, 2010 through to now. Just kind of, if you can bookmark really, I suppose, the key milestones for you through that journey. And I'm certainly interested in the team building aspect of it, and the kind of culture that you instilled in building that team. Because we talked about that a little bit offline. I'd love you to share that part of your story.
Yeah. So, as I said, I started in a different role. I was creating this legal regulatory function, and I did, and it grew, and it was, it was great. But it was interesting because it was the sweet spot of what I really knew how to do as a lawyer. That's what I had been a regulatory attorney in, all across the telecom space for most of my career. So I had this team of, they were all great lawyers, but really I felt like I could have done any one of their jobs. I mean, at any given moment, I could just drop into anything they were working on, and I would be pretty conversant in it, and be able to sort of manage that as well. So, I had this team and it was great. And we did that work. We went through a couple of really huge proceedings. And then during the way I did that job, I really got to know the business very well in Philadelphia. I was based in DC. And then sort of towards the end, towards year 4, so the then CEO asked if I would come over and take the GC job. And I said, no, no, thanks. I'm in DC. I'm a regulatory attorney. This is what I do. You're going to want me here. We thought we had a new deal closing, and I did all the compliance around our huge NBC acquisition. And it was quite a hefty job. And I said, you're going to really want me here when we do this next acquisition, which in the end didn't get approved. But I just really was like, oh, why would I want to do that? I was in the parent company. I was like, why would I just,
Yeah.
I'm a regulatory attorney. And I sort of said no over the course of a year, till my then boss at the time was like, you need to say yes to this. Like, this is a thing you say yes to. And I don't want you to go, but I think you should go. And he's like, don't look at it the way it is now. Look at it, think about it the way you're going to do the job. That's why he wants you there. So don't look at what you see and say, I need to do that. So I took it. I mean, really, as much because of his prompting as anything else. And I made this leap, and it was absolutely terrifying for the first, 3 or 4 months. I mean, I walked in the door, and suddenly I had, at the time we were about, I don't know, under 70 people, but still it was about 50 or so more than what I'd had. And I didn't know anything about most of the law that they were doing. When I suddenly had employment lawyers, I had patent lawyers, people doing advertising agreements and content acquisition agreements, and like any number of things that I was not expert in, like real estate lawyers, things that I just felt like I'm not conversant in. So what am I doing here? And I couldn't just drop in and do one of their jobs. And it was really a total rethinking, because I'd been such a hands-on lawyer, of what my job was. And I spent those first 4 months in this panic of, I don't know all the business, I don't know all the terms, I don't know, how do I know who's good? How do I know if they're right or they're wrong? And what am I actually bringing to the table? And I think, we talked about stuff. And I went at some point on this sort of management training thing, probably in about March. I started in about November. And we did this, I had this session with, it was a game where you were like managing a team of people, and you had to give them information, and there was a budget and all stuff. And anyway, in the middle of the game, I was sort of the manager, and in the middle of the game, they stopped and asked all the teams for feedback about how things were going. And my team at the time said, well, we just don't, she's not giving us like enough information. Like we need more information. And I had this moment where I just suddenly realized, like, okay, wait, this is my job. Like, my job is to give all these people who work for me what they need to do their job. So it's not about me just being the best lawyer I can be anymore. And honestly, that's not a really good exchange for the company, is like that they'd have me as a great lawyer, but have 60 or so people sort of struggling to not, and therefore not being their best. That it would make way more sense for me to stop worrying about learning everything and being the best lawyer I could be, and instead totally turn my focus into, how do I help these 60 or so people be the best lawyers and professionals that they can be. And it was really this incredible aha moment for me. I came back, and it really changed how I thought about everything in the department. And it's like, for my job is to make sure they have information, that they have access to the business, that, really that they love their jobs, that they want to be here, that, that I can lift the boats for them, that I can get them recognition, I can get them, funding, whatever it is. But like, my job is to create a place where this company is going to have a huge store of really good lawyers who want to be here and want to do a really good job and can do a really good job. And that is sort of, I sort of say that is the other milestone, because I feel like that's what I've been trying to do.
That story actually had a little bit of a profound effect on me. I remember when you told me that a few weeks ago, and I thought, you know what, I've never actually thought about it in that way. And it's so kind of obvious and simple, and I don't know if it's inverse, but very different to what, particularly where we come from, and a profession where we are the expert in this particular, and the skills that we build in our team become experts too. And if we want experts from anywhere else, we go to another partner or another department, and we pull that expertise in. And so we've done that over years. But this kind of revelation, my job is to make essentially, what do I need to do to provide people with what they need, my team with what they need to do the best they can possibly be at their job. Really kind of simple, but super powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and some of it is also, what do you need to do is you do need to provide leadership, and you need to set the bar high. I mean, it's not all just resources, but it's really like that. My orientation is, I'm going to make this a great department. So that's what I've been trying to do.
All right. Any other particular milestone in the journey so far that kind of that you want to call out?
I mean, that was really the most significant. We've grown.
Yeah, tell me about that.
We've tripled the size of the group since then. One of the first things I did see when I got here is I went into the CEO and I said, we're just under resourced, and you're getting all these complaints that all the time that legal's too slow and legal's getting away. I was like, and we can work on that, but we also, there has to be the right number of resources here. And we're just not set up to be a modern company that can move quickly. So we've grown quite a bit since then. We set up a compliance group, which we didn't have. We set up a government investigations group, which we didn't have. Thank God, about now, maybe it's 6 years ago, I'm not sure. I said, we used to have someone who was half a privacy lawyer and half something else. And I said, I don't think it's going to work going forward. I think privacy is going to be a big deal. So we set up a privacy group, which is now one of our larger groups, privacy and cyber. We'd set that up. So, I mean, we set up a lot of things that weren't even a part of this legal department over the years, which I'm just really proud of and glad. And they've just made it a great law department.
And so tell me, as the team grows, it becomes more complicated, more in number, how does your leadership style, is there anything about the way that you run the team, or is there anything about your leadership style that has to change as the team? Because less and less people get, let's say, direct access to you, so that you've got to probably enable more and more, whether they reflect your style or they your own leadership develops their own style. Talk to me about that and how you think about that as your team grows.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, your desire, which, I mean, despite like all of my beliefs and principles about how to run this, there still matters where you're like, no, I have to actually get involved in that. You have to be a lot more selective about that, just by definition, because there's more and more and more happening. So you have to be a lot more selective about where you're suddenly going to go deep instead of just, broad, which also means you're deferring to your team a lot more, and you have to trust people a lot more and get to the place where you sort of understand that, which I think means also really knowing your team and making sure your team knows you and understands enough to know what things they need to escalate to you, and you have to trust them to do that. And that's like a constantly evolving dialogue. Hey, that's something I did need to know about, and I've got great and independent leaders who report to me, so they don't want to be micromanaged. So like having to get them and have a really clear sense of what I need to know about and why I need to know about it, which is the other piece, I think. And, not just in terms of me and my leaders, but everybody. I shifted very much a few years ago to this focus on what I call connecting the dots, which is, our job is like, we have to connect the dots for the business, but among all the legal issues that might be relevant. So when a problem comes to you, I always say, problem comes in the door to you, I don't care what kind of lawyer you are and what your specialty is. Because if you sign off, they're going to walk away and say, legal has signed off. But there's like 15 other legal issues that haven't been flagged for them. So your job is to know enough, no matter what you do, to say, wait a minute, we need someone from content in here. We need someone from IP in here. You don't have to do it all, but you do need to know enough to connect the dots, bring in those people, not make the business go bring them in, but you bring them in, connect everybody together, and then we go forward. So to do that, everybody needs to understand what this department is doing across the board. So we do a lot of presentations by like, hey, you're working on this, you're working on this, you're working on that. We just did a series this year, which we're trying to repeat every 2 years, where every team in the legal department, because there's 10 of them, did a presentation for people who had joined in the last few years about these are the kinds of things we work on, in the legal operations group, or these are the kinds of things compliance works on, or these are things we worry about, and this is who we are. Because you need to know what other people are worrying about enough to raise your hand and say, wouldn't that be an issue here? And I say, like, whoever you are, no, I don't care if you walked in the door yesterday, I hold you, each of you, responsible for raising your hand about something outside of your area. And so then it behooves the rest of us to just constantly be educating everybody about everybody throughout the department so that you can connect the dots.
Yeah. It's funny, I talk about, you often don't hear people complaining about over communication. In fact, I never hear people complaining about you communicating too much in an organisation. It's typically the opposite. Tell me, top of mind, Lynn, what are the 2 or 3 things that are kind of top of mind for you as as the General Counsel of Comcast Cable, as in your leadership position? What keeps you up at night, business-wise? We'll get to the personal stuff, but business-wise, and occupies your mind share.
I mean,
that you can share with us anyway.
I think it's impossible not to be worried about, I'd say, cybersecurity / privacy, but more cyber these days. I mean, it's a constant threat. There are constantly issues. And even when you have your own great people and great systems and they're sort of up to the task, you have vendors and partners and things go wrong there. And then I just feel like it's a constant battle for our lives on that. And the plaintiff's bar that's out there is just like has a field day no matter what happens, no matter who's at fault. It's just it's just a complete kind of strict liability. If something happened, we're going to sue you. So it's hugely time consuming, and I worry about it. And it's really easy to get pieces of it wrong, even if you're doing theoretically everything right. So that takes a lot of mind space these days. And of course, AI and where's that going, and what does that mean for us legally? And that's just going to be an issue for all of us for a while.
Let's talk about the second for a little bit. AI. Any kind of top of mind thoughts, or just the way you and perhaps your team is thinking about the impact that might have, or what you might be able to, how you might be able to use AI? Anything that you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 different issues. One is, how are we comfortable with the business using it, where all of the IP issues, which are going to have to get resolved in the next 2 or 3 years, they're just incredibly thorny right now. And you don't want to be frozen in place and not do anything with it because you're worried about those risks. So, we trying to find thread that needle between we want to be innovative and you want to find ways to reduce costs these days as well, but you don't want to be stupid and expose the company to risks that we really shouldn't be taking on. So that's really, it's not an easy dance. I mean, I just looked at one recently where I was like, well, if we're ever going to say yes to something in the space that seems as safe as it could be, but it's not that safe. So I don't mean safe in a cyber mean. I mean, it's safe in terms of will we not have liability? So it's hard, because you don't want to be the last person left standing that says, I'm legally safe, but you haven't done anything.
That's right. And especially, of course, for any kind of any content creation, then I hadn't really thought about, but because you can't be last, you don't necessarily want to be pioneering, but you might have to take that risk. And I can imagine when legal is asked about a question, it's always, they can never give the full rubber stamp. It's always going to be qualified with these risks, and business may or may not get a little frustrated, as they typically do, because they want to sign off. That is, I can well imagine that is a thorny issue, but you don't have a choice. You have to navigate it. You've got to make calls.
Yeah, I mean, you could just say no, and we'll wait a couple of years, but or just use closed, or made large companies who can really, really indemnify you. But it's but that that is a cost to it as well. So that's really hard. And then of course we're also looking at it as a legal department, and what can AI do for us? And I have a challenge always to my team on like, we have to incorporate technology. Lawyers, at least my lawyers, hate technology, hate doing things any differently than they've done it forever. They're sure that it works the best way it possibly could.
Yeah.
But every few years I sort of challenge everyone to sort of say, what should be different? What should we do? Take a look at the year ahead. Like, how should we be different? Come up with like what processes can be improved. Like, really just spend the next 3 months asking that question with your entire team, especially the people who've just joined us, who I think still have like clear eyes to be like, why are you doing that? Because after a while, I say like everything becomes like the things I leave on the stairs for my husband, who, if he doesn't see it the first time, he's never going to pick it up. And I feel like there's processes like that all over the law department where it's just like, well, we should have picked it up a long time ago, but now it's invisible. So I tell all our new people, I want your eyes because you're going to see the thing on the stairs. So I do challenge them to say like, what can be different, and can we be using technology? And we have made some advances. We've built a lot of tools to make things easier for the business. But this year, my challenge was like, should we start using AI for things?
Yeah.
And I think the real question is, to me, is will AI ultimately at least help us answer a lot of the drudgery tasks in law, or things that require the ability to spot things and sort things, but not necessarily do really creative analysis. I feel like that's what I want my lawyers for. And at least I don't currently believe like that AI is really going to be able to do what a lot of us do, because it's sort of not like right or wrong. It's like, yeah, I think we could take that risk. Like,
Yeah.
they're basically trusting me. It's not even legal. It's just like, you seem to have a good gut, right? Um, so that's the question. Like, can it really do that? Will it save enough time? And I think it will. I think there are some really great paths that we'll be eventually able to move over to legal, but move over to AI tools. But, as I say, like, I think there's a company that we were working with a little bit with, and I keep saying them, the problem is you're coming into like constrained budgets already, I think, in most of corporate America right now. And then legal departments, which always have constrained budgets, and asking us to invest in a new tool. I was like, you can't tell me that it's going to save me money over time. I need you to save me money this
Now.
year
Yeah.
so that I have the money to invest in you, because I don't have extra money sitting around. So that's really the question, is like, are there things that you can do so quickly for me that actually can show, I don't have to show like longer term savings to the business. I have to be able to fit you into my budget, which means this year I'm not spending some other money because I spent money on you. And that's hard,
Yeah.
but I think that's where we have to get.
So a couple of things coming out of that. One, surprise, surprise, you don't have a line item in your budget which says legal technology, great tools to improve my efficiency, my team's efficiency, or whatever. That doesn't exist. The second is the challenge you highlighted around change, whether it's lawyers or anyone. Change is always hard, especially if you're just used to doing something, you're comfortable doing something the way that you've done it a long time, and it's more or less worked, and then you're resistant to anything that sometimes that you have to learn or relearn or whatever. How do you think about that? I mean, you use one example where you challenge let's say some of the new team members who can see what's been left on the stairs and clean it up. Any other strategies that you think about that you use to really get us all out of that kind of change resistant, kind of natural inclination we might have?
Yeah, like sometimes you really just have to like take your foot and like cram people in there. What I've tried to do is find a mix of like, who are my champions in the department who really like this stuff, and get them working on it. But also like, who are some of the more resistant people, but they're resistant of it because they really know all the requirements that get involved in doing something, and they really believe. They don't believe a tool can do it, but they're the ones who have all that information. And if you make them be a part of like, look, you need to be a part of solving it because you are bringing all the information to the table. If you can, so it takes longer when you have those people in the mix because they're so resistant. But little by little, they do get there, and like they do like the tools that they have finally produced, and they believe in them because they've helped achingly shape them. So I do like sort of try to match those people up together.
I love that strategy, because then when you get the biggest cynic converted, and they become such a champion, and their story about, and everyone looks and says, well, boy, if Laura can do that, can change her mind on something like that, that must be meaningful. So I love that strategy. It's hard, and you're absolutely right. It's a longer term strategy, but if it can work, if you find the right individual and you convert them, they can be the greatest champion. And then everyone says, well, if Laura's doing it, we must be able to do it.
Right. I mean, and they do drive everyone else crazy who wants everything to happen faster. And honestly, then they get invested in whatever's created, and it's hard because you got to reinvigorate them to keep it changing. But if you don't involve them, it doesn't matter what the tool is. They're going to fight it. So I feel like no matter how resistant they are, if they're part of the project team, they're going to feel some ownership in what comes out of it.
Yeah. Let's switch to relationship with law firms. How your teams and legal functions relationship with its law firms has, let's say, changed during the course of your tenure there, and what do you look for now that perhaps you didn't look for now, and what's most important to you? Because there's a lot, particularly with AI, there's a lot of questions around, okay, what is it that, what are the expectations you should be having? What should you not be paying for? Talk about how you think broadly around the Comcast Cable's relationships with its law firms.
I mean, we are sort of, I'd say, blessed, honestly, in having some very long-term, very, very deep relationships with a small stable of firms who do a lot for us, and have on their side invested the time and effort to really know the business, the people in the business, the products of the business, the issues that our industries are facing. So we are very important clients to them, and they are very important law firms to us. And that has not changed. In fact, to me, and I still very much remember being outside counsel, like there were companies you liked working with because it was a good relationship. And I think by and large, we have that relationship with those law firms. I think they like working with us. I think it's fun. We include them. We may push back on some issues. I may say, like, do not bring that many people to the phone call, or if you're going to bring them, bring whoever you want, but don't bill me for them. But I actually try to include them along the way because I know what that feels like, and I feel like they're more bought in. So a lot of those firms have been with us for a long time, and so we can work a lot of issues out, like how are you using AI or whatever the issue may be, kind of collectively, because it's in our mutual interest to work stuff like that out. And I think also they're making enough money off us. They don't have to nickel and dime us over things that we probably shouldn't be paying for. Um, so there's more play in the joints when it comes to firms that we don't use as frequently. And so we'll go out and look for people, and then we're probably harder bargainers than we would otherwise be. And we do push back more than we may otherwise have. And in general, we are looking for what is the guidance and the limits that we need to be putting on our firms in terms of the use of AI, but also in terms of their own cyber provisions and that sort of things. These are things we just never thought about before that obviously are much are part of the conversation now. Again, not as much with our longer term firms because I mean it is, but we're sort of in it together.
Yeah.
So I think it's a harder thing for newer firms. We're way more international than we used to be. So we've had to find the right firms that sort of fit us and work with us, right, from an international perspective. Different issues. We've really had to find the right privacy firms, for example. And so, I mean, we do have more targeted firms where it's been a more constructed relationship. But then if we're happy, we want to stay because we're a complicated business. And when you take the time to learn our business, it's very hard for someone else to come in and just be like, I really know this space and I'm going to be great. And I'll just step in. And you're not. You're starting so far behind the 8 ball to not really understand how we do things because we are complicated. So, so that's I mean, obviously, one of the things we started really focusing a lot on over the past decade was diversity and making sure that our firms were bringing us diverse teams. We're a very diverse group. And so it is something that we've expressed that we care about a lot with our firms. We've asked them to sort of report on their own efforts. We've come together with some of them that we work with more regularly to see if we could also help. You can second someone to us if you really want to help develop someone and help develop relationships, on your nickel. But if you want to create opportunities for a new young rising star and you want them to have tight business relations, I'll work with you to help make that happen. And vice versa. We've invested in people at those firms, so that probably was less of an active dialogue 10 years ago than it has been.
More recently. A couple of topics before we start, we close out. One is around what I've certainly heard, particularly in the last 12 months, around kind of changing expectations of a legal department, the way they report, use around AI, transparency, taking initiative around owning the narrative as to how they're basically business, strategic partners to the business, rather than just a kind of, if you like, the risk assessment, Department of No, whatever you call that. Is there anything that you think about in relation to just the way you control that part of the narrative? Anything that you do in order to be seen essentially as a real strategic, have a real strategic partnership with the business, as opposed to that's legal, they've just got to sign off. Yeah or no? Talk about that.
I mean, I think we're a little bit helped here by the fact that we are so heavily regulated, and most people in the business understand that, and therefore understand like they need us.
Yep.
But still, I mean, you still have to build the trust and the relationship and that and the like, and still people want to get their stuff done quickly. But someone said to me the other day about our department, she's like, no, I don't see legal as Department of No. I see you guys as like creatively working towards a yes.
I love that.
I was like, I'll take that.
Yep. I'm going to make a note of that. Creatively working towards yes. I love that.
But I mean, the reality is that like I have a letter that like we have an onboarding guide because I don't want anyone to come in with just a BlackBerry for my legal department, and it has a letter from me in it. And one of the things I say is like our job is to protect and advance this business, and sometimes those two things feel like they're not aligned, but our job is to align them. And so you should not be protecting the business just for the hell of it. You're protecting the business because that's a way of advancing the business sometimes, right? Someone's short-term great idea project that's going to completely screw us in some longer-term way that's not advancing the business just because you let that person do what they want to do. So again, I'll go back to my connecting the dots. Like, you need to understand enough about the overall strategy, the long-term goals, the like what's likely to happen in Washington, D.C., what's likely to be like a reputational disaster because of the newspaper. So you really need to understand all that so that you can make a decision about like, is this something like I should be saying no to because it's not actually in the interest of the business. But so you really have to know the business well. And one of the things we do structurally besides besides bringing in like parts of the legal department to talk to each other about what we're doing, we bring in business speakers all the time so people kind of can get a sense of the business strategy. So we do that, we have a monthly meeting where we just bring in people. So maybe business speakers, maybe legal speakers, we go back and forth. But besides doing that, I also really, for all our major business units, have tried to assign a lawyer who gets to sit in the strategic meeting. So they go to the businesses, as like senior leadership meetings, so that they're sitting there and they really are seen as a strategic advisor, that they're part of that. So we have that for business services, and we have that, for like whatever it may be, for advertising, and they really are right-hand partners to that part of the business. And I think that's just the overall model, honestly, of our legal department is we are really, really regulated. So you can't just do whatever you want, but let's see if we can figure out a way that we can do what we need to do.
Yeah.
And I've said to the business, there are times where I've said, like, doesn't feel good to us to say no. Like, we're shareholders here. Like, we want to say yes where we can. So if we're saying no, like, I understand it doesn't feel good, and we'd rather come up with a way to get you there. But sometimes we can't. Like, sometimes it's just a no. So, but I feel like the business sort of appreciates, like, if we're saying no at this point, by and large, they respect us because we try not to just say no.
So I had lunch today with General Counsel, and she described, and I hadn't heard this description before, but it's great. She said, I try and educate each one of the lawyers in my legal team that you are stewards of the future enterprise. And I love that, stewards of the future. So the decision you're making today to get a deal done, unless that is supporting and advancing the future enterprise, you're not doing your job. So I hadn't heard that language, and you reminded me when you talked about creatively getting yes, but you've got to be thinking long term. So I thought that was a great description.
Yeah, I like it too. I'm going to write
Yeah.
it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Round out with my two favourite questions, Lynn. The first one, um, uh, as a 25, take yourself back to your 25-year-old self, and what advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you know
That's interesting.
now?
I think I would have said, you can really figure it out. Like, don't be afraid to do completely new and hard things that you don't know anything about, because you'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
yeah.
So I love that. And let me share with you the two most popular answers. The first one is don't worry so much. I just worried too much. And when I look back, I just didn't need to worry. And the second, actually interesting, was, you know what? I could have taken more risks, which kind of dovetails into what you're saying right there. I'm with you 100%. If you're driven, motivated, you'll figure stuff out. That's what we all end up doing. And if you haven't, and that's why I actually encourage take more risks, because nobody usually says, "Oh, you know what? Back then I took too many risks, tried too many things, tried things that I wasn't good at or I didn't know anything about." Nobody usually says that. It's the I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken some more risks. Okay, last question. What keeps you up at night, or is there anything, Lynn, that keeps you up at night now, outside of cybersecurity?
Cyber dev. I always used to say, losing arbitration, like, having that go away would kill us. But then the plaintiffs' lawyers figured out this concept of mass arbitration. So now even arbitration is bad. Although I think we have our arms around that, but some of that can keep me up at night. But yeah, I mean, I worry about the business because I
Yeah,
am a shareholder, and
yeah,
it has been tough times. It's a really interesting and stormy sea in our entire industry, all the way across all the different parts of our business. Crazy times. So I worry about that. It's exciting but challenging, but it's and I want my department, I want to make sure that I can be a steward for all the careers of all these people in my department. I want to know that we can advance them, that they can grow, that they want to be here over the long run. And so, you worry about that.
and it's funny how that becomes more and more important to you, I think, as you get older and more advanced in your career and so forth. The focus shifts. When you're young, the focus is all 100% on you. And that's one thing I would tell my 25-year-old self even earlier, to have a focus of those around you and being a much better enabler for those around you, and not having just you as the focus. Because I think over time, as you get more, you work out that's the stuff that is really meaningful, and that's the stuff that you really, really care about, and that's the stuff that stays with you. So anyway, fantastic to share, I think, a good 45 minutes or so with you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye for now.